They say grief hits like a wave. But waves are predictable. Waves follow rhythm. This was a collapse. It began with a phone call that shattered my world in under 5 words. "Ma'am, there's been an accident." I didn't hear anything after that. Not the officer explaining the curve in the road. Not the name of the hospital. Not the details of how the rain slicked the pavement or how another driver had come out of nowhere. I only heard the echo of my son's name followed by a past tense. Jason.
Gone.
My body moved like it belonged to someone else. Somehow I got dressed. Somehow I ended up at the morgue, standing under flickering fluorescent lights, staring at a sheet I didn't want to lift but couldn't not lift. He looked asleep, peaceful even. My mind, traitorous, delusional, insisted he'd wake up if I called his name the right way. I didn't cry. Not yet. Grief, I've learned, delays payment. It waits till you're alone, till you exhale, and then it sends the invoice. But in the hours that followed, I wasn't alone. That's when Damien appeared, a familiar face from our corporate circle. We weren't close, not really, but he'd always been polite, intelligent, the kind of man who made other men nervous, not because of his stature but because of how effortlessly he made people trust him. He brought coffee, sat quietly beside me, handed me tissues I didn't use. "I heard," he said. "I can't imagine." He didn't try to fix anything. He didn't spew platitudes. He just showed up, in the fog of pain that felt like lifeline. The funeral was arranged in 3 days. A quiet service. No suits from the company. No press. Just Jason's friends, my sister, and the strange silence that sits beside you when your child dies before you do. Damien handled the catering, fielded calls. At some point, I gave him my office keys and my assistant's number. "Just until I can breathe again," I murmured. "Of course," he nodded. "Whatever you need." And I thought, naively, stupidly, that grief had revealed the best in people. I didn't know that while I was picking out a headstone, Damien was picking out a new chair for the office I built from scratch. If you've ever had someone use your lowest moment as their stepping stone, keep listening. This isn't just a story about grief. It's a war story. And I didn't stay down for long. Grief isn't loud. It's not the wailing and the dramatics people expect from movies. It's silent. It's sitting on your bed, fully dressed, staring at your closet for 3 hours and realizing you forgot to eat for 2 days. It's picking up your son's hoodie from the couch and hugging it like it's a living thing. It's forgetting where you parked, forgetting how to speak, forgetting how to care. The company was the last thing on my mind. Jason had built it with me, my son, my partner in business, my miracle child. We'd launched it when he was just 22, full of fire and audacity. I was the quiet strategist. He was the bold visionary. And now he was a ghost haunting my every file folder. Damien was just always there. He dropped by each morning, took over morning calls, smiled and assured me, "Just focus on healing. The board sends their condolences. I'll keep the engine running." I let him, not because I trusted him, but because I couldn't see. He started forwarding me meeting recaps. I barely read them. "All above board," he'd text. He even brought my favorite breakfast one morning. Oats with sliced almonds and strawberries, Jason's old Sunday tradition. "I remember you mentioning it once," he said with a small shrug, as if it hadn't been laser-targeted. At some point, I gave him full proxy access. Just for 3 weeks, I told myself. He even set up a new workspace in the corner office adjacent to mine. I didn't ask why. I didn't have the strength. "You're family now," he said once, lightly touching my shoulder as I sat numbly behind my desk. That word stuck to me like grease. Family. Jason had called him shark smart once. The kind of guy who can charm a snake while dissecting it. I should have listened. But grief is a silencer. It doesn't just muffle your voice, it drowns your instincts. And Damien? He didn't need to take anything by force. I handed it to him, wrapped in pain, bowed in trust, and signed in exhaustion. He moved faster than I realized. The filings, the signatures, the backdoor vote, all while I was flipping through sympathy cards. The day I buried Jason, the sun didn't show up. Clouds hung like they were grieving too, and even the wind seemed unsure of its own direction. I wore black, but not for symbolism. I wore it because choosing a color felt impossible. The priest spoke softly. I didn't hear a word. All I remember is the thud of soil on wood. Final. Cold. Cruel. While the casket was being lowered, Damien stood to my left. Sunglasses, pressed suit, one hand on my back like a comfort, the other holding his phone, vibrating every few seconds. He never once looked rattled.
But I should have seen it then.
Because while I was at the cemetery, his assistant was submitting paperwork at the county clerk's office. While I was laying flowers, his lawyer was filing amendments with our corporate registration board. And while I was staring at the marble headstone that now bore my son's name, he was rewriting ownership documents and backdating minutes from a board meeting that never happened. My signature, on 5 key forms, appeared in ink I never touched. He copied it from old financials, applied it with digital ink, and rushed the documents through a notary friend he'd kept off the books for years. By the time I returned home that night, exhausted, numb, drained to the bone, I no longer owned the company I co-founded. The papers had been expedited. A silent coup in tailored wool. I didn't find out the next morning, or the next week, because grief is blind. And Damien was a performance artist. He brought flowers weekly. He added my son's face to the company homepage with a gentle black ribbon across the bottom. I wanted to honor him, he said, eyes a little too glassy. Jason would have wanted the company to thrive. I nodded, still suspended in fog. He hosted a memorial board dinner in Jason's name, gave a speech about carrying the torch forward. They gave him a standing ovation. I stood in the corner and clapped, like a sleepwalker. If you're watching this thinking, this couldn't happen to me, it could. It does. Because when you're at your lowest, the wrong person doesn't offer a hand. They sharpen a knife. It had been almost 5 weeks. I hadn't returned to the office since the funeral. I'd been working from home, or more accurately, sitting in a house full of memories, forwarding an occasional email and deleting dozens more unread. But that day, something inside me cracked open. I showered. Put on the blazer Jason always said made me look scary powerful. And I drove to the company we built together, our company. The security guard smiled awkwardly when I walked in. Mrs. Weller, hey.
Hi, Connor.
Just heading upstairs. He hesitated, glanced at his monitor. Your badge might not work, just a heads up. I forced a smile. Must have deactivated while I was out. I tapped it against the scanner. Red light.
Denied.
I tried again. Same result. I looked up. Connor wouldn't meet my eyes. It's not a malfunction, he said finally. You're not listed anymore. Something primal shifted in me, like a predator waking up inside the prey. Excuse me? Damien said you'd step down, he added quietly. Said you were grieving and needed space. The board voted.
I didn't hear the rest.
I took the stairs. By the time I reached the glass doors of the executive floor, I was shaking, but not from weakness. The doors were locked. Inside, my assistant, was sitting at a desk she'd moved away from my door and into Damien's. He saw me first, stood up calmly, smiled. You should have called first. Let me in, Damien. Let's talk in the lobby, he said, voice smooth like polished marble. This floor's under restricted access now. Board's orders. I am the board, I snapped. His smile widened. Not mocking.
Worse. Pitying.
Not anymore, Madison. The documents were signed. You gave me proxy, remember? We held a vote. The company needed stability, and you were grieving. He gestured with faux compassion, like a surgeon about to explain the amputation he already performed. I stood there, stunned. The world narrowed to a pinpoint. You're lying, I whispered. You're welcome to take it up with legal, he said. But I'd advise against it. This transition was ironclad. Behind him, someone slid into my chair. She laughed at something. The chair spun slightly. Damien looked back at me. Go home, Madison. You've been through enough. I left without a word. But something followed me out of that building. Not despair. Resolve. Because that chair? that desk, that floor, they still legally belong to me. And Damien had just built his empire on a house of forged paper. He thought my grief would bury me. But he didn't know I co-signed every founding document with Jason. And my son, God bless his meticulous heart, left behind a clause that was about to set my world on fire. I sat in my car for almost an hour, not crying, not yelling, just breathing. Deliberate, sharp, mechanical breaths. Like a machine trying to remember it was once a living thing. Damien had locked me out of my company, my son's dream, my legacy. He'd used Jason's death as a footstool, coded his theft in flowers and condolence emails, spoke at my son's memorial with tears in his eyes while backdating board votes in the dark. The old me, heartbroken, fogged, paralyzed, might have curled into that grief and stayed there. But something in me snapped. It wasn't rage, not exactly. Rage is loud. This was a calm. A terrifying, surgical calm. I wasn't going to throw things. I was going to build a fire in the basement and watch it consume the top floor first. And to start, I needed to find the clause. Jason had added it the year before, on his own, after a nasty encounter with a potential investor who tried to strong-arm us into a buyout. I added protection, he'd told me, just in case someone tries to sneak a vote past us while we're distracted. At the time, I'd brushed it off. Who's going to pull that? He'd smirked. I watch people, Mom. You build systems. I build traps. I tore through my old records like a woman possessed. Binders. Laptops. Hard drives. I was up till 4 a.m., drinking stale coffee and talking out loud to the ghost of my son like he was sitting beside me. Come on, Jace, tell me you left it somewhere obvious. At 4:13 a.m., I found it. A scanned PDF in an archived folder labeled Emergency Ops. Clause 9b. In the event of any transfer of controlling interest or executive authority not explicitly and physically signed by both co-founders, all transactions are void and revert to the last legal configuration. Physically signed.
Not digitally.
Not copied. Not implied. Physically.
Signed.
My fingers trembled as I read it. Damien had used a scanned image of my signature. He had forged control using a method that Jason's clause specifically invalidated. I almost laughed. Then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in 6 years, Nadine Birch, forensic auditor and corporate watchdog, who'd once turned a $100 million embezzlement scandal into a 3-man prison sentence and a Pulitzer for the journalist who reported it. Madison, she said, answering after 2 rings. Didn't think I'd hear from you again. I'm calling in that favor, I said, my voice steady. I need a quiet audit. Off books.
Deep dive.
No mercy. Who's the target? His name is Damien Grant. He stole my company. From your cold hands? From my grieving ones. There was a pause. Then, send me everything. That night, I didn't sleep. I drafted a list of every file Damien had touched, every document he'd submitted, and every board member I'd once trusted. It was time to learn just how deep the infection ran. I didn't need pity. I needed proof. And Nadine? She was about to turn my heartbreak into hard evidence. This wasn't about ego.
Or pride.
Or reputation. This was about a mother whose son built a kingdom beside her, only to have a snake move in while she was still digging a grave. And I was about to show Damien what happens when you play God with a woman who's got nothing left to lose. Nadine didn't waste time. By noon the next day, she'd already sent me an encrypted drive titled The Body Count. Inside, folders labeled by department, time-stamped correspondence, metadata audits, and, most damning of all, side-by-side signatures, mine versus Damien's forged versions. Highlighted. Dated. Indexed. You weren't paranoid, she wrote in the message. You were nearly murdered. Financially speaking. She wasn't joking. Damien hadn't just forged my signature once. He'd done it 6 times. All tied to strategic pivot decisions, board power shifts, bank authorizations, share transfers. Each time, he'd used an identical digital signature, an exact match of a prior document's scan version, which, according to Clause 9b, made every one of those decisions null and void. He hadn't anticipated Jason's paranoia. Or his precision. Clause 9b had legal teeth. Ironclad language. And the original document was notarized, physically, by a family friend who had since become a judge. I had leverage, but I wasn't about to barge in screaming about forged papers.
No.
Damien built a trap for me. Now I was going to let him walk into mine. I filed nothing. Not yet. I made no calls to the board. I didn't send so much as a cease and desist. Instead, I kept smiling. I even sent Damien a message. Thank you again for holding down the fort. Let's grab coffee next week. I'd love a debrief. He replied within minutes. Of course, Madison. I'm always here for you. He was smug, comfortable, overconfident. That's the problem with narcissists. They mistake grief for weakness, silence for surrender. He had no idea that every email he forwarded me was being reviewed, indexed, and submitted into a private legal packet Nadine was building, one document at a time. And Damien had left fingerprints everywhere. Backdated board meeting notes with no electronic trail. Signatures that predated file creation metadata. Internal emails that contradicted external filings. He wasn't slick. He was just fast. But now, I was faster. I met with my attorney 2 days later, and we mapped out the plan. File injunctions, freeze the board, pull banking access, and serve Damien publicly, with media watching. But before that, I had one final thing to find. Proof of intent. Because incompetence can be dismissed.
But intent?
That's the difference between a resignation and a prison sentence. And Damien, bless his polished suits, was not an accidental fraud. I just needed the evidence. And Nadine was about to hand me the final piece. Nadine sent the email at 3:04 a.m. Subject line. Found your smoking gun. Attached, a single screenshot. The email Damien had written 3 days before Jason's funeral. Not to me. Not to the board. To a private shell consultant tied to a Cayman Islands firm. She's out of commission for the foreseeable future. I'll have full access by next week. Move on the ownership filings and accelerate the transfer. Cold. Clinical. Premeditated. There it was, intent. Before the funeral. Before the proxy access. Before I gave him anything. He knew he would get control. He'd planned to take it. And he counted on my silence. On my grief. On my complete unraveling. But instead, I now held a perfect storm in my hands. Forged signatures, violation of Clause 9b, and a time-stamped, self-incriminating email. Nadine had even tracked down the server log metadata, proving the email hadn't been faked or spoofed. It was real. He's not just vulnerable, she said when we finally spoke on the phone. He's radioactive. How long before he realizes I'm coming? I asked. He won't, she replied. People like Damien never believe they're beat. Especially not by someone they thought they'd buried emotionally. I stared at my reflection in the black screen of my laptop. Not the same woman who wept at a gravesite. Not the same woman who let herself be handled. I was steel now. Steel and strategy. I spent the next 72 hours preparing for war. Froze my assets temporarily to prevent retaliation. Secured my son's original hard drives in a fireproof case. Had a legal team quietly prep injunctions against Damien and the entire board. Even set up a camera crew to record a founder's address for the public. Every step I took was deliberate, precise, controlled. Meanwhile, Damien sent me another email. Let me know when you're up for lunch. You've been so quiet. I replied with a smiley face and a soon smiley face. He didn't suspect a thing. And he wouldn't. Because the last thing a thief expects is for the mother of the man he stole from to have been taught by her son how to hide a sword in grief. Revenge is not rage. It's restraint. It's what you don't say in the meeting. What you don't reveal in the email. What you pretend not to notice, while sharpening your knife beneath the table. I didn't announce my comeback. I ghosted the boardroom like a specter with a ledger and a plan. The first thing I did was start buying shares, quietly. Not in my name. Through shells, trust accounts, old colleagues who owed me favors. Small pieces at a time. just enough to avoid triggering any flags. 3% here, 2% there. Another 4% through a shadow partner Damien had no idea was my sister's LLC. By the end of 2 weeks, I had regained a controlling interest without ever setting foot inside the building. Next, I reactivated 2 former allies. Tom Ewan, the company's original CTO, pushed out by Damien a year ago for being too slow-moving. Monica Reyes, Jason's college friend and a federal compliance analyst turned cybersecurity pitbull. Tom still had the original IP documentation from the day we filed the founding patents. Monica had a contact inside the regulatory body that had just received Damien's forged filings. Together, they formed the backbone of what I now called my silent tribunal. Meanwhile, Damien was busy polishing his throne. He launched new initiatives, smiled for trade magazines, hosted a Founders Without Fear networking gala, standing under a banner bearing my company name in bold gold letters. She stepped back during a difficult time, he told one publication, but she entrusted the company's future to capable hands. Capable. I let the word marinate. I watched the gala from my tablet, a glass of scotch in hand, rewinding and replaying the part where he accepted applause for something I bled to build. Not with anger, with focus. Then, quietly, I filed a motion. Just one. A preliminary claim of procedural fraud tied to forged governance actions, filed through a separate LLC, with Monica listed as claimant. It was enough to trigger an internal compliance review from the state board, without tipping my hand. The review bought me time. And time was all I needed, because the bomb I was building wasn't made of paper. It was made of optics, reputation,
Power.
and soon, I was going to walk into that boardroom and let Damien know. The woman he underestimated had been writing his eulogy in silent ink. If you've ever had someone smile while stealing from you, keep watching. Because some betrayals aren't met with screaming. They're met with a signature and a subpoena. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. I arrived at 8:57. No warning. No invite. No announcement. Just me, heels clicking against marble, black blazer buttoned, face carved from the same stone Damien thought he'd buried me under. The receptionist stammered when she saw me. "Ms. Weller, you're not on that. I'm not here as a guest," I said calmly, flashing a silver portfolio. "I'm here as the founding partner and legal majority shareholder." I didn't wait for permission. I walked in. The boardroom fell silent like a collective exhale had been held too long. Damien stood at the head of the table, mid-sentence, hands mid-gesture. He froze. "Madison," he said, eyes flicking toward the security guard like a trained reflex. "I wasn't aware."
No.
"You weren't," I interrupted. "But that's all right. I'll catch up." I placed the portfolio on the table. Opened it slowly. 12 copies of Clause 9B. Highlighted. Notarized. Followed by screenshots of the forged emails. Signature analyses. Chain of custody breakdowns. A letter from the State Compliance Board requesting Damien's presence for a pending fraud inquiry. A court order freezing his personal shares. Effective immediately. "What is this?" he asked, voice tight. "This," I said, taking my seat at his chair, "is your exit interview." Monica appeared behind me like clockwork, dropping a fresh filing on the table, a formal board injunction citing breach of fiduciary duty. Tom followed, connecting a tablet to the conference screen. Up came a side-by-side breakdown of every falsified document Damien had filed. Line by line. Time-stamped. "You forged my signature 6 times, I said. "But it's the 7th that's going to put you in court." "You have no proof," he started. "Actually," Monica cut in, "you emailed your intent to commit fraud."
Pre-death.
With dates. We verified the server log. It's already with our Attorney General's office. Damien looked at the board, his carefully cultivated panel of yes-men and fair-weather allies. No one made eye contact. Power, you see, is only useful while it protects. The second it flickers, people scramble for warmth elsewhere. "You think this is enough?" he snapped. "You think the company will survive this scandal with you at the helm again?" "No," I said, standing. It won't survive. It'll be reborn. And with that, I handed over the final packet, Jason's founding documents, complete with his handwritten annotations, preserved in his original Dropbox folder. This company wasn't built on ambition, I said. It was built on integrity. And you don't get to rewrite that just because I was grieving. The board voted unanimously. Damien was stripped of all titles, holdings, and access, pending investigation. Security escorted him out. Not a word from him as he passed me, but his eyes burned with disbelief. He hadn't just lost a company. He'd lost to the one person he thought would never stand again. He thought grief made me soft. But grief doesn't make you fragile. It makes you sharp. The press got wind of it within 48 hours. The headline on Tech Insider read, "Startup Queen Reclaims Empire from CEO Who Usurped It During Her Son's Funeral." I didn't write that headline, but I didn't hate it. By the end of the week, the board's silence cracked like a dam. 2 members resigned publicly. One issued a statement claiming they had been misled by Mr. Grant and had deep remorse for the betrayal of my trust. Remorse, I've found, is surprisingly camera-ready. A 3rd member flipped completely, handing over emails that showed Damien had promised them stock kickbacks for voting to remove me. I handed that packet to my legal team with a bow and a smile. As for Damien, his accounts were frozen by court order. A separate fraud investigation had been opened against him, and every document Monica had traced now sat on the desk of a federal prosecutor. He tried to go to the press. "She's using her son's death to build sympathy," he told Business Today. "It's a calculated narrative." The internet devoured him. Screenshots of his forged documents flooded Twitter. The phrase, "while she was burying her son," trended for 3 days. His face became a meme, a symbol, not of power, of predation. I didn't speak publicly. Not yet. But I did walk into that office, my office, on a Monday morning at 8 a.m., just as I had for 7 years straight before grief tore a hole through my life. The same receptionist, Connor, greeted me with red cheeks and a mumbled apology. I nodded. Then I walked past the executive floor, past the boardroom, past the space where Jason's portrait now hung above the entryway. And I stood inside the quiet glass walls of my old office. It still smelled faintly of cedar and lemon oil. I sat down, opened my laptop, and got to work. Not rebuilding, reclaiming. That week, I restructured the board, brought in survivors, fighters, single mothers, people who understood what it meant to lose everything and start again. I renamed the company under a new banner, JMW Industries. Jason Michael Weller. His full name, his full legacy. I sent a company-wide email. You don't honor the dead by preserving their ghost. You honor them by continuing their mission with twice the fire. If someone's ever tried to use your grief as a weapon, remember, mourning doesn't make you weak. It makes you dangerous. Because when you've already lost everything that matters, you stop playing nice. Grief doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. Sometimes it's a silence between meetings. Sometimes it's a photo you can't delete from your phone. And sometimes it's the fuel that keeps your engine running when everything else inside you wants to quit. But Jason's name wasn't going to live in silence. It was going to roar. I launched the JMW Foundation the next quarter. Its mission was simple: to fund and mentor children of single parents entering tech and entrepreneurship. Because Jason grew up with a single mother and still built something world-changing. Because someone out there is holding on to a startup pitch while surviving loss. Because no predator like Damien should ever stand between someone and their dream again. We started with 10 ments. I personally interviewed all of them. One girl reminded me of Jason, restless, brilliant, impatient. She had a wearable tech idea and was halfway into crowdfunding it with 0 guidance and 3 part-time jobs. She looked me in the eye and said, "No one thinks I can pull this off. I've got no one." I smiled and replied, "You've got me now." The company culture changed overnight. We cut out the bloated executive bonuses Damien had implemented and redirected that capital into 2 new initiatives. Grief leave, paid time off for employees dealing with the loss of family. No questions. No pressure. Integrity Incubator, A department that vets internal proposals not just for profitability, but for ethics. Because I wasn't just rebuilding a business. I was creating a fortress where no snake like Damien would ever slither in again. People started calling me the Widow CEO. I didn't mind. Because the world finally understood that loss doesn't shrink you. It sharpens you. And Jason? He wasn't just a memory now. He was in the infrastructure. Every hallway had his fingerprints. Every pitch deck bore the initials JMW. And every time I walked into that building, I knew this was no longer a company salvaged from betrayal. It was a kingdom rebuilt in fire.
He stole my peace.
But I turned that theft into purpose. He took the company during my darkest hour, and I turned it into a beacon. I didn't know the letter existed until Monica found it. She'd been backing up Jason's old cloud drives, cross-referencing archive logs from before the crash, when she pinged me. "There's a draft," she said. "It's addressed to you." My heart stopped. It was dated 2 weeks before the accident. The subject line? Transition plan if you ever want to step back, Red Heart. I clicked. And there it was.
Mom.
I've been thinking about letting you finally take the CEO title again. You were always better at the hard decisions. I just made the noise and wore the sneakers. I know you never cared about the spotlight, but I want people to remember this was your idea too. You gave me everything. You never said no, even when it cost you sleep, sanity, and every relationship you could have had. I want you to start living again, not just through me. I'll always be proud of what we built. But I'm prouder of how you raised me to believe I could build it. Love, Jay. I read it again, and again, and again, until the words blurred, and the tears I thought I'd run out of found their way back. Not bitter this time, not from pain, but from a deep, settling kind of peace. I printed it, framed it, and placed it beside his old desk in the founder's hall we built in the new West Wing. Every employee passes it on the way in. Every intern reads it on day one. And me? I read it every morning before the first call, before the first fire to put out, because it reminds me of something simple. This wasn't just revenge. This was love made visible. This was legacy. They tried to erase me while I was burying my son. They thought I'd disappear. They thought I'd fold. But I came back with the one thing Damien never understood. I had purpose. And a promise I would never, ever break.